Hey, welcome back to another episode of the OWNR OPS Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Gray, and in this episode, we have Stephen Day joining us. Stephen is the owner of Armor Excavation down in Central Texas. Stephen's also an investment banker, and he owns multiple other small businesses. What I love about Stephen's approach to building his excavation business is, as you can imagine, it's financially sound. Coming from the investment banking world, he brings financial principles to his excavation business, but his approach of listening to customers and their needs and then providing the customers with what they need is something I really loved talking to him about. I learned a lot from Stephen here. I'm sure you guys will learn a lot if you listen to the whole episode here. And if you are building an excavation business or trucking business, you'll probably want to listen to this one because he shares a lot of good financial information. Finally, if you guys enjoy these episodes, would you mind to leave us a quick 5-star review? We would sure appreciate it. I'm going to encourage you guys, if you are owning and operating your own local service-based business, go ask your customers for 5-star reviews. That is, if you feel like you are doing your absolute best in delivering 5-star service. I'm going to encourage you guys to do that because that is how you're going to get the most out of your SEO. When you have a Google My Business that has multiple 5-star reviews, 10, 20, 30 plus, Google's going to start serving you up in their algorithm, and you're going to start getting more online leads. Podcasts are no different. We'd sure appreciate the 5-star review on YouTube. If you're listening there, please like and subscribe to the channel. You'll get notifications whenever we release the weekly episodes. We also are summarizing each episode into a weekly newsletter now. Make sure to go sign up for that on ownerops.com. That's OWNROPS.com/newsletter. All right, let's jump into the episode. Do you operate heavy equipment and want to grow your business online? Check out Bear Claw Media. Now, for those of you who have been listening, this was formerly Land Service Marketers. We just decided to brand it all under the Bear Claw brand since we've already been building all the social media accounts. So what is Bear Claw Media? We offer digital marketing services for other contractors throughout the U.S. in the heavy equipment industry. So think land clearing, excavation, snow removal, septic install. If you're doing any of those operating heavy equipment and you have a high ticket order value, Bear Claw Media could be right for you. If you want somebody to handle all your social media management, and if you want somebody to bring you more leads to help you grow your business, then Bear Claw Media is the exact service that we've used to grow Bear Claw Land Services. We'll implement the exact same strategy into your business. You'll get a dedicated account manager. All you have to do is upload photos and video from the field of your equipment into a shared iCloud album. Visit gobearclawmedia.com and we can handle it from there.
All right. Well, we've got Stephen Day from Armor Excavating joining us from Texas. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah, we had a couple scheduling conflicts going back and forth here. We were just talking about the perils of being an excavation business owner. So the other day, it was, I knew exactly the look on your face because I've been there many a times. And you mentioned something about, I got to figure this out for culverts, and I don't know, my guy's calling me right now. I got to go. And so, what happened that morning? I'm just curious from an operational standpoint.
But we have one construction road access into the site, and we were trying to lay 2 culverts across that access road. So when we're putting in the culverts, it shuts down entrance into and out of the site. And so we were trying to get those culverts set. One of them, or actually 2 of them, it's a 40-foot culvert connected together, got damaged with an excavator. So there we were with a trench opened up, a road closed, and no pipe to put in. So because we had damaged it. But anyway, we got through that crisis and got some more pipe, got it put in, and got the road closed back up.
Yeah, and those of you listening to the podcast who own and operate businesses in this industry, you know exactly what he's talking about. But it's probably not the best time to record a podcast when that's happening. So we rescheduled here to Saturday morning, and here we are. So Stephen, thanks for joining the show. I'm really interested in this conversation because you've got a unique background here. You mentioned to me that you came from investment banking and then started this business, I believe, either with your son or with your son alongside of you. So could you just tell us the story of a little bit about your background, your professional work history, and then how and why you got into starting an excavation business?
Well, the one thing is that, excavation is not that far from my background in terms of growing up on a farm, a working farm in Indiana. We were around equipment. We operated equipment at a very young age. And so for us, that was not something that was intimidating. My wife has a similar background, so understands the business very well herself. And so Armor Excavating actually started in 2017 with a John Deere compact track loader, 333G. My oldest son, Aaron, I think he was in roughly 7th grade at the time, and we had purchased it to begin a development project for ourselves on our own property, and then had a discussion with Aaron about, you could take this machine and go out and make some money with it, start a business with it. And so that's how Armor Excavating was founded, and he named it Armor, and we got started. And so he was clearing cedar for a local farmer. There's a local sustainable farmer who had some ground he was looking to clear, and we started out operating this compact track loader for $100 a day. And for a kid at that age, he thought he was making real money, and it just grew from there. And so we began to take on larger and more complicated jobs, and of course we were doing that own development for ourselves as well. And then when we purchased the ranch in Hunt, Texas, there's a lot of development that needs to be done on the ranch that we'd recently purchased. And so the projects became even larger, additional equipment was needed. And then that's really where the trucking need started. So we needed to have road base and crushed granite and other things hauled to us. And what we were finding is for this smaller middle market part of the segment of the market, that there just wasn't any reliable local hauling companies. And so you'd schedule your hauls, you'd plan your equipment, plan your crews around it, and then the trucks would just not show or just break down. And so that's when we realized that there's a real need in the market. There's a few really large players locally. They're largely focused on very large commercial development, whether it be building an interstate or a very large project. And so, they're not interested in hauling 20 or 30 or 40 loads to somebody. And so that's the part of the market that we saw open it up. And so that's where Armor Excavating really began to grow and became what I would say vertically integrated, where we developed local relationships with local quarries directly, and began hauling material for ourselves initially, and then began to do it for others. And then from there we grew to where we are today, doing, $1 million plus projects of all types of sizes and complexity.
That's incredible. So you've basically used the trucking aspect of the business to grow into sort of the market that you wanted to be in on the excavation side, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy between the two and a lot of interdependency between the two. And I think that's where we have a lot of great customers who are running their own form of businesses, whether they be concrete site development guys who understand the relationship between material delivery and coordinating your equipment and your crews. And so we have had a number of customers that have come to us and have stayed with us because of the reliability of having the materials on the ground when they need them. And the other thing too is we found that a lot of people only specialize in one type of hauling. Like they might only have small tandem dump trucks, or they might only have a flatbed. And so we have one of the most diverse fleets with tandem dump trucks, quad axle dump trucks, end dump, belly dump, flatbed, low boy. There's almost nothing that you can't get hauled by us. And so we have contractors who have their own low boys to do their heavy haul. But if their truck is down, they know that they can call us. And we have a great crew. We have really hardworking guys, and they'll jump in and haul on the weekend or haul in an evening to get something done for somebody. And so that diversity of the trucks has also been a great asset for us in terms of being responsive to our customer needs.
So when you identify this need for a need in the trucking market, a lot of our listeners are either just starting out or they've started out and they've got some business going. I'm very interested to hear your perspective on how you go about actually building that. So a lot of people have great ideas, right? And a lot of people can see the opportunity, but actually executing on it is completely different than seeing the opportunity. And so I'm interested to hear like how you thought about executing on that need in the market. What's step one?
Well, step one is talk to your customers. And that sounds like a cliche type of thing to say, but we really just started talking to our customers and just asking them what they needed. And that's really what led us to a lot of these different opportunities. It wasn't some type of insight or genius or some type of risk or gamble that we took. We simply asked them. And so start at a core with something that you know how to do and that your customers need and value, and then just simply start asking them what you can do more for them, and just listen to the customers and the pain points. I'll give you another example. Is what we're finding is a number of our customers were complaining that if they wanted to put in a ranch road or a driveway, they'd have to call one vendor for the chip and seal, one vendor for the concrete, if they had a concrete entryway or concrete safety sleeves on their culvert. They'd have to call somebody else to do some drainage or erosion control and to clear cedar. And what they were dealing with was multiple companies and having to coordinate multiple companies and getting everybody on the same page with the project. And so that's another need that we listened to. And so we said, hey, we'll do all that for you, one stop. And it's become a great lead generation for our customers in the hauling business. And so we don't want to compete with our customers. And so we'll call, somebody in the landscaping business, a concrete business, a chip and seal business that we do hauling for, and we'll give them the opportunity to work on that part of the project. The difference is we've become the interface with the customer, and we deliver the entire project for them. And so they have one voice, one person to coordinate with, which makes it much easier for them. But then we're also able to generate business for our customers, which we like to do.
That's incredible. So that's a whole different side of the business as well. But is that you interfacing with the customers, or have you hired staff like project managers in place to be able to divide those up to your customer base?
Yeah, we have two leaders in the business, and one who sort of focuses more on the hauling side, one who focuses more on the excavating side. But then, of course, very closely coordinated between those two. But we do have two primary leaders for those two different key parts of the business, for sure, because they have different requirements as you expect for management with the customer, and how to price and how to manage the staff, and so that's how we handle it.
So you have one on the actual excavation side, and then one on the trucking side of the business. Is that correct?
Right.
And what is the title of that person? Is that like operations manager? Is it general manager for trucking?
Yeah. Manager of excavating, manager of hauling, or director of operations. And so, there's really one director of operations who kind of oversees everything. And then, of course, you have the person who leads the hauling side, leads the excavating side, so that those pieces get the attention that they deserve.
Yes, definitely. So getting to that point, that's what I want to talk to, because, I think a lot of our listeners are going to say, okay, I'd love to get to a point to where I have cash flow to support making that hire. So let's take it back here. You have the 333G with your son. Like, what's the next piece of equipment that you guys end up going and purchasing? Or like, what's the next opportunity you guys see?
From the compact track loader, we moved into excavators. And so that was kind of the next logical move for us. And so we have, some larger ones and some smaller ones. We also believe in terms of keeping the business model a little bit virtual. And so I think that sometimes business owners get into the headset that I have to own it all, or I have to lease all the equipment, and I have to have all these pieces, and I have to hire all these people. But I would just challenge you a little bit to think about creating an organization that's a little bit more virtual. So, for example, we have a very close friend who's one of our hauling customers who has a Barco 930B, which grinds up trees, it mulches trees. It's a very large unit. And we offer that service to our customers, but the person actually doing it is truly a separate business owner. But we provide that as an integrated service. And again, it's one phone call, one project management. But we haven't invested that capital in that machine. It's a very expensive machine to buy, to operate, to haul around. And so that's a good example of what I mean, where you can actually offer a number of services to your clients where you actually haven't yet invested the capital, and that gets you a good foothold into the overall project. And so the fact that we don't really mark up or make any margin on that is it doesn't bother us. What we want to do is have the entire project, and the pieces that we'll do well, we'll do those well, and the pieces that we don't, we find trusted partners who are often clients of ours to go do those other pieces. Because like I said, we don't want to compete with our clients. And so that's how we've looked at it. So I'd encourage business owners not to always think about, do I have the cash flow to go do X, Y, and Z? But could I partner with somebody and share in the profit, share in the revenue, share in the project risk to be able to deliver it? And I think that's one of the things that we have done that helps reduce the capital outlay and make things more efficient, but also you're helping other businesses in your community. And by creating that network and working together and solving project problems together, you're building a stronger fabric between you and your customers and local businesses. And so we like doing that as well.
Striker Digital specializes in SEO services specifically for local service businesses. Bodie and Andy, the two co-founders, have helped me get Bear Claw Land Services to the #1 search result on Google inside my state for my specific search term. If you want to learn more, visit strikerdigital.com. That's STRYKER-digital.com.
You guys do own some excavation equipment, but there are certain pieces that you partner with other people who specialize in certain areas, like the clearing side of things. Now, what about the trucking? Have you guys invested the capital to own all of that in-house?
Yeah, that's the one part that you cannot partner with and rent it, if you will, like you can on the excavating side. On the excavating side, there's a number of companies that will arrange for heavy equipment renting, and that can be very cost effective. When you think about the daily cost of operating, owning, and maintaining a piece of equipment, rental can be a very good solution, cost-effective solution. I think sometimes there's a lot of, in this industry, there's bragging rights on the size of, the dozer you have or whatever. But from an economic standpoint, it really doesn't make sense to own some of that stuff. It makes sense to really rent it and pass through those costs on the project. Now, if you're utilizing something enough and you need the flexibility to have it all the time, that's when ownership becomes critical. So for like some of these basic smaller pieces of equipment, like a mini excavator, a mid-sized excavator, a compact track loader, you're just using them all the time. You can't be running back and forth to a rental yard to pick one up every week. So those basics are also less expensive, but those basics are necessary. Now on the trucking side, that's not true. You can't just rent a dump truck. For the most part, I haven't found that as a real viable option. And so for all the dump trucks, we own all those and all the tractors. So we have the combination of tractors, semis, hauling the big trailers, and then of course the dump trucks. So that side, you have to. Now, the one thing you can do is you can put those on lease payments and spread that cash flow out so you can match the cash flow. So that's, one option is you can finance it out any period you want, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on, what type of revenue you're able to make per month. And you can really match that investment. And if you take care of your truck, largely, if you decide you want to get out of that business, you can sell that truck and for what it's worth, pay off the remaining note on that truck and exit it. So that's the strategy there, where I would say that just take it slow, buying a truck at a time and putting it to use and make sure you understand the economics on it. And if that works, you can prove that out for 6 months or so, then go ahead and think about making your second purchase. And
is that the route you would recommend our listeners to go? Like, have you gone the financing route with every truck?
Some trucks we purchased and some trucks we financed. And so I'd say for the newer units, we did finance the newer units. Those are very, very expensive trucks. You're talking about $250,000, $275,000 for a truck. And that does not really make sense to lay out all that capital up front. And so financing those really expensive pieces, sure, I think that makes a lot of sense. The one thing too, in terms of the timing that we took advantage of, was under the initial Trump administration, the tax bill that he put through, the tax legislation. It offered what was called bonus depreciation, where when you purchased that truck, you would get to depreciate 100% of that truck in the first year of its operation to offset your profit. That's a real advantage to business owners because it allows you to get that truck put to work and build a customer base and sort of sort out the profitability of it and do that for, a year while you get that benefit of that depreciation. So it really shelters a lot of profitability. And so, we took advantage of that. And I would say clearly one of the reasons why we scaled up pretty quickly, we were willing to do so is we could take that. Now that bonus depreciation is phasing out now, so it's no longer at 100%. But with President-elect Trump coming back in the office, people expect that tax bill and some of those items will be extended. Whether this one will be or not, I don't know, but I would clearly keep an eye on that because that has a real big impact on your cash flow and your profitability by being able to depreciate that 100% in year one.
Let's dive into the depreciation. That's been a big question of mine. So when you take that depreciation, does it ever come back to bite you later on?
And what do you mean come back to bite you later on?
Okay, so for our listeners, could you explain how depreciation works? One, and then I'll clarify that question
Yeah.
on
Okay. Sure.
on asking like why it would come back to bite you.
Right. Sure. So in terms of depreciation expense, there's two ways to think about depreciation. Is one is an operational perspective and a pricing perspective, and the other way is from a tax perspective. So I'll just clarify and say at the moment I'm talking about from a tax perspective. And so let's say that you had a business generating 500,000 of revenue with $250,000 of profit. You'd be taxed on the $250,000 of profit. And if you're an LLC like myself, you'd be taxed at your personal tax rate. Let's just make up a number, say that's 40%. At the end of the year, you file your tax return. You had revenue of 500,000, you had profit of 250,000, you would pay 40% of that $250,000 in taxes. Now, if you bought a semi-truck, a large dump truck, quad axle, quint axle, something like that, it costs you about $250,000. If you bought that truck, and you can finance it, so that's still considered buying it. So whether you pay cash or whether you finance it, doesn't matter. You still bought the truck. And let's say it cost you $250,000. Under the Trump tax legislation, at the beginning, you were able to depreciate the full $250,000 in that year. So for example, an example we just gave, your $250,000 of the profit would be reduced by $250,000 of depreciation expense. You're allowed to depreciate 100% of that asset in year one. And so then your taxable income goes to zero. So then you would literally pay zero taxes in that year. Now you fast forward to the next year, hopefully your revenue would go up because you've got that truck, and you make 600,000 that year and 300,000 of profit. Then you would pay the taxes on that 300,000. So what it does is it accelerates what historically might have been a 5-year depreciation period or a 7-year depreciation period. So this 250,000, let's just say divided by 50,000 per year. Historically, you would have had a $50,000 deduction per year for 5 years to reduce your profit over those 5 years. So effectively what this bonus depreciation does is it pulls forward 5 to 7 years of depreciation expense all to day one and reduces all of your taxable bill today. So that's how the depreciation works for tax purposes. And so that's extraordinarily advantageous for people. And this is where with tax policy, it's just a negotiated agreement that we've come up with in society for what we want to do. But I will tell you, in the heavy equipment industry, where equipment is so expensive, that is a real incentive to buy that equipment and take risk. And so like that tax policy, I would say, gave me more confidence to grow faster because of the benefit that it gave. And let's just say you had in that example I just gave, let's say you had $100,000 of profit, okay, and you bought a piece of equipment and you depreciate that. So 150,000 would offset that profit and make it a zero tax year for you. And the $100,000 loss, the additional 100,000 of depreciation, that gets rolled forward into next year's income tax return and offsets the income next year. So you get to take 100% of the depreciation. If it throws you into a loss, then that loss gets rolled over into the next year tax return. So it's something to be very focused on in terms of when the new administration comes in and what happens to that tax bill. But I think that this is one of those areas that's likely to be renewed because it's such a powerful motivator to people to purchase equipment. And as you know, this is a big business and generates lots of income for our economy.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for giving that overview. So I will dive deeper into my question now. So let's use your example of the 500K of revenue, 250 of profit, and you purchase a $250,000 quad axle dump truck, and you decide to claim all of that. Well, let's use the prior tax administration laws, and you claim 100% of that depreciation this year. So right now you're paying zero taxes, but you've now put a lease payment or a finance payment on your books for $250,000 piece of equipment. What would that payment be over
roughly $5,000?
You've got a $5,000 payment. So roughly $60K for the next year of cash outlay. And that would be over what, 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, call it 5 years, 5, 6 years. Yeah.
So for the next 5 years,
example, simple 5. Yeah, call it 5
yes.
years. Keep it simple.
So for the next 5 years, you've got a $60,000 payment on that vehicle. What do you need to do as a business owner to ensure that that doesn't catch up to you in a negative way?
Haul a lot of loads. So make sure you have customers, and you've got to be running that truck, almost every day. And so so the trick in trucking is to really, there's very low margin in trucking. I think sometimes, people think, oh, you've got, a dozen trucks or whatever, you must making a killing. Trucking is a very low margin business. You really start to make your return on that truck after you've paid it off, after you've, earned that first $250,000. And so the fully paid off truck is when you really start to see the benefits. So I would share the following things for somebody who wants to get into trucking. Number one, don't do it. Okay. It's a hard business. It's a low margin business. So think about doing something else. But for us, it's essential to what we do. Like, we couldn't have that piece. We couldn't have our overall customer value offering without it in terms of what we're doing. And it's essential to support our existing projects. So we do a lot of self-hauling. We do a lot of internal hauling, right, for ourselves. So I'd say the following things. Number one is have a very long-term perspective on getting a truck and getting a return on it. So if you buy it new, expect for a very, long-term return and really kicking in after 5 years. If you're getting into trucking, as a starting point, I would not buy new. I would definitely buy a used truck, and I would get something in the middle of the road. I wouldn't buy a 20-year-old truck that has a lot of wear and tear on it, nor would I buy a new one, but something in that 10-year range, 7 to 10 year of use. A lot of the value has come out of the truck, and it still has a lot of life left in it. So I'd start there. That's number one.
This episode is brought to you by Dialed In Bookkeeping. Ben and his team provide bookkeeping services, job costing reports, and accurate financial information for the home services industry. If you're looking to keep your books up to date, visit dialedinbookkeeping.com/OWNR OPS. When you use this specific landing page, you'll get your first 3 months 50% off.
Number two is, you got to sort out your mechanic piece right away. I'm not a mechanic, and nor do I have the time to be a mechanic. And so getting that sorted out as to who's going to mechanic on your truck. Heavy diesel mechanics are in high demand, and they make good pay when they're good, and they're busy, and there's not many of them. Certainly in my region of the world, there's not many of them. There's just a few good ones, and so they have a line at their door in terms of getting your truck serviced. And so we have our own mechanic on staff, and so that's been a big help, but it's expensive. And so really taking care of the truck and knowing how to care for the truck is really important. So conducting those pre-trip inspections, doing that preventative maintenance, all those types of things is really important. And know your cost. Really, it's really important to know your insurance, your fuel, your maintenance costs, cost of operations, cost of tires. Because what happens is you start running and pricing, and you're making money today. But if you're not putting money back every single day for that next set of tires, a single tire on a truck, a good tire is going to last. It's going to be $500-$600 per tire. So, putting a new set of tires on a truck is really, really expensive. And if you don't have that $8,000 saved up, then it's going to be really difficult to make that work. Same thing is if a part on the truck goes down, if a main cylinder breaks on that truck, the part alone for the main cylinder is going to cost you $1,500 and another $1,500 to put it in. So it's easily a $3,000 repair for just one cylinder that goes bad. Sometimes you can reseal them and sometimes you can't. So those are the types of things that you have to be putting money away all the time to be ready to maintain that truck. And that truck has to be on the road every day. So you can't be, holding off the maintenance.
What are the margins on trucking? You mentioned slim margins in trucking.
I'd put in that kind of 5% type of range. And I think that, we're on a path to be able to make a 10% margin. That's our goal, is to be at a 10% profit margin on it. Really, the key is to have those trucks running every day. And so having a mechanic and a maintenance plan in place where you can get the work done in the evenings on the weekend is absolutely critical. And if you're starting out with your first truck, that's absolutely crucial. Being down for 3 to 5 days will literally kill your month. Because then, of course, you have weather issues and you have seasonal issues with holidays, things like that. So you're going to have a number of months, like in November, in December, January, where you won't get 4 weeks of hauling, period, full stop, And so sometimes July can be a little bit slow during the summer months if the heat's real high or people are on vacation. And so there's some months where you're just not going to get a full month hauling. So you have to plan for that too from a revenue perspective.
Yes, so many moving parts in this, and I keep bouncing around, but I am interested in it. So you heard it from him. Stephen comes from a finance background, and so I hear a lot of guys throwing around numbers on margins, where people ask about profit margins, and I want you guys to hear it from him, because if you guys can't tell already, Stephen knows his numbers. So 5 to 10% on trucking of actual, that's true profit margin. One of the next things that we're going to jump into here, you mentioned a mechanic. It's like business, you always have the chicken and the egg problem, it seems like. Okay, now I bought this truck, but now I need to go recruit this mechanic. But I also need to make sure that like this truck gets on the road and I go find jobs and that thing is moving, basically, I guess I was going to say 100 miles an hour, but I guess 60 or 65 miles an hour every single day. But then you've got to go recruit the mechanic now. Like, how do you think about that as you are building the business? It seems like you've come into this, Stephen, with a lot of experience. You're very sound. You're very calm about this. So tell our listeners like how you approach that situation.
For us in this particular situation, this particular market, the difficulty of finding a mechanic allowed me to have time to prove out the need for a mechanic. Okay, so what I mean by that is I can just look at my mechanic bills and say, okay, the engine overhaul, transmission overhaul, my mechanic may not be able to do that. The future mechanic that I hire, he may or may not be able to do that. Let's set those repairs aside. Then there's a lot of other repairs that are no-brainer that a normal everyday mechanic, heavy-duty mechanic would be able to complete for you. And so we were able just to look at the math and to see, hey, at $165 an hour for outsourced mechanic services, or at the cheapest, it was $130 an hour, the lower end of that range. That's kind of the range we worked in. It kind of depends on the project and the complexity, et cetera. And then you just simply look at, well, what, if I could hire a mechanic for something less than that, how much savings would it take to pay for that person? Now, given the size of operation that we have, it became very easy to break those mechanic bills down into the two categories and show that it was a no-brainer if we could find somebody. Now, the first mechanic that I hired actually thought he was a good mechanic and took the hydraulic box apart on an excavator and put it back together and tore up all the valves and sent metal throughout the entire machine. And I paid $20,000 in cash to Holt Caterpillar and another local mechanic who knew what he was doing to fix that whole solution, right? And so you're going to make mistakes, and you have to be prepared to make those mistakes. That you may have a mechanic who claims he knows what to do. It started out as a simple project. He was going to replace a gasket. Gaskets aren't generally hard to replace, but he pulled off the central hydraulic unit to replace that gasket, and that's a unit that really only Caterpillar should touch. And so we had to let him go, not so much because he made the mistake, but because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And when he was told about the problem that he created, and he began to object and disagree, well, that's not a coachable person. That's not a teachable person. And so, that he made two mistakes on two projects. In total, cost us $25,000 in cash to fix the very problems that he had actually created. And so it can be, very expensive to make a bad mechanic hire, which we did. And now we have another mechanic on staff who's doing great. And so we're delighted to have that person on staff. And it's been instrumental to uptime. So that's the other way we measure it is track your downtime. So at the end of the month, try to really understand, hey, this excavator was down for 5 days, and whatever you bill that out for per day, think about it, just a round number, $1,500 per day, 5 times 1,500, that's real number. That's real math. That's That's real revenue, right? So start looking at your downtime. That's the other thing too, is we think about just the mechanic bills. That's easy for us to see what that cost is. But think about your lost revenue. And that became a real issue for us. We had a quad axle in particular that had so much in terms of downtime that it was costing us so much in terms of revenue that almost right there could justify a monthly mechanic. Now, that goes back to my trucking examples I said earlier, and that was a 20-year-old truck. And so we actually let it go because the maintenance was more expensive and the downtime was killing us in terms of productivity. And so I just encourage you to look at those two things together as you think about the mechanic piece. But we clearly had grown into it. We had already grown past the need. It was just a matter of time for us to find the right mechanic. And so between those two numbers, lost revenue and actual cash out of pocket, it became a no-brainer for us to hire. So that may not always be that clear cut for everybody in terms of when to hire. But the other thing too is some of these heavy-duty mechanical guys, they actually know how to operate equipment. A lot of them came from some operating backgrounds. And so in the situation where you can actually put them in the seat and let them do a little bit of operating and do a little bit of mechanic work, there's ways to be creative sometimes and multitask them until you fully grow into the 100% need for the mechanic, right? So think about that in terms of one of the questions, but my experience is they can all operate as well as mechanic.
What can one expect to hire a mechanic for? Just a salary range?
Yeah, so very regional dependent and depend upon three things. One, are they just the mechanic and you provide the tools in the shop? Number two, do they provide their own tools? And number three, do they provide a service truck, right? And so that's basically where you are. And so in our region of the world, a mechanic is probably $30 an hour. They're probably $40 an hour if they provide all their tools and buy their own tools. And then if you have a service truck, you can pay them a mileage fee to use that service truck. But that's kind of the general range for what a mechanic would cost for in our region.
Do you know the mileage fee that you would pay off the top of your head? Do you have that model built out?
Yeah, we just use the IRS reimbursement rate.
Okay, so that is a good starting point because that was a question of mine. And I sort of just took it at face value whenever I made decisions on like reimbursing for people with their personal vehicle. But what you're saying is
for personal vehicle, I would never go above that rate. And I actually would never go below that rate.
Okay.
So for a personal vehicle to a long job site or whatever, I absolutely use that rate and no other rate. That would be to me as a non-negotiable item. With a service vehicle, if there's something different, like they have to go into incredibly rough terrain and they pop a tire or something like that. I mean, we want to work with our guys and be, reasonable about it. But that's a starting point.
Okay, cool. Okay. Another thing you mentioned here was downtime, but I want to ask the question of, you brought it up, like you just used a rough number, $1,500 per day for the excavator. How have you come to an equation for billing out your equipment? Have you used any sort of framework for figuring that out?
We have, and I'd say that I don't have that finalized in my head. And so I'd say that's a work in process, but I'll share it with you in two models that we use. If you're going to have an operator in an excavator every day and he's running that machine full time all day long, then I think about one full rate per day. And so kind of going back again to, $1,500 a day for an operator and the equipment to run that for a full day. So that would be one model. And so I would price that. This is a 5-day job. I'm going to have him full time. That machine is $1,500. Now, a lot of jobs where right now we're running a job, we have probably 7-8 pieces of equipment on that job site. And we have a couple pieces of equipment. They are not being used every day. They are support. All right, so right now our 333G is on the job site, but it's just a support role, and so it's not being used every day. And so then I would think about more like a weekly rate. And the way that we have thought about that weekly rate, and it's something in the order of magnitude of $750. The way I think about that is two ways. One, what does it cost to rent that piece of equipment for that week? So I always had trouble charging a client for a piece of equipment that's more than what we could just rent it for. That just kind of conceptually doesn't seem fair to the client to charge them more than what we could get for it, just sitting there. And nor as a businessman does it really seem smart to think that my equipment is costing me more than I could rent it, because in that case, I should just rent it every week, right? And so that's that's an anchor point. That's kind of a floor, right? More like a ceiling, I should say. That's kind of an anchor point, kind of a ceiling. The second way I look at it is, and this will have some debate, I'm sure different people have different perspectives, but what we have done is we have taken a piece of equipment and we've assumed that it has a 4-year life. How many hours per year realistically can it work? Because it's not going to work every day, every week, right? So a piece of equipment that's fully utilized literally might only be working 40% in terms of workable days. That might be a fully utilized piece of equipment. So you think about 40% of the working days per year, and then you think about how much diesel it consumes per day, and you think about kind of the depreciation rates on that piece of equipment. And what we like to think about is trying to recoup our cost of that equipment within inside of 4 years. And that's if it's a new piece of equipment. Now, if it's a used piece of equipment, just depending on how much life it has left and things like that, we may want to recoup the cost right away. I'll give you a funny story is we bought what we call a ranch truck. Okay, it's a dump truck. It's not licensed to go on the road. And the guys have nicknamed it Old Yeller. And it's a pretty worn out piece of equipment. Now, we expected to get that paid for immediately, like literally within a month, it paid for itself. So that's one extreme where you accept that. But something in that range to fit that piece of equipment. So if we bought a used piece of equipment and it's 75% through its useful life, then we wouldn't put it at 4 years. We'd want to recoup that at 1 year, right? And the model would work at 1 year. So I say think about all those costs and what that costs to have that piece of equipment. And you know what? When we worked all of that out, it largely came out to the rental rates, which kind of makes sense, right? That the guys who are renting equipment are wanting to make the same kind of return off that equipment on the same time frame that you are, right? And so that all kind of held together. There's some people who run the model. This is where I'm saying it's controversial, because some people say, oh, well, Stephen, your excavator is going to last 10 years. You're right that it's going to last 10 years, right? But from an economic standpoint and a return on capital, I want that to be paid off within 4, so that for that second tranche of its life, the second 6 years, when there's going to be more maintenance, by the way, more repairs, I want that to be really making me some money at that point. That's really where you get the return on your capitals once it's paid off. So that's our view on it. And we're still learning and open to it. But pricing is ever evolving, and knowing your cost is like an ever evolving analysis. It just gets more sophisticated over time. I'm going to ask your next question for you. Where's the greatest cost leakage? That's something I would just want to share with everybody. Is when you think about cost leakage, here's where we found cost leakage in our model. Okay, and we've worked hard to try to get that. The fringe benefits on top of payroll. So you think, okay, I pay a guy $25 an hour. I want to get some markup on that of, let's say, $30 an hour. And that's what I'll bill him out at. Well, your payroll tax, if you provide any kind of health care, which we do, all those types of costs, it's about a 20% load rate. So any labor cost of $25 an hour, you take that times 1.20 to get your all-in fringe cost, and then you start adding your profit on top of that. So that's one example. The second example is your service truck. So we have an F-350 dualies that we use. Those burn diesel. They wear out their tires, right? And when you don't factor that into the cost of your job, you're so focused on your job, it's like, it's going to require a dozer, it's going to require an excavator, it's going to require a skid steer, blah, blah, blah. It's the diesel and this and that. Well, what about the F-350 to get to the job site every day, right? So we started layering that in as part of the cost of the job and how much is going to be dedicated to this job A versus job B, right? So that's another example of cost leakage. And then the other part is kind of in our business, what's a little bit unique to our business is that you're buying dirt and you're reselling it to the client. It's super easy to say, well, obviously you're going to pass that through. Well, when you get as many quarry bills and you haul as many loads as we do, right, and you have some dirt that you're buying and not passing through, and you missed a few quarry bills, it's really important to get all those costs incorporated. So there's a lot of little areas of leakage. And so I just warn everybody, when you're thinking about pricing and bidding stuff out, really think holistically about all the cost in your business and making sure that you're allocating some level of that.
If you haven't signed up for the weekly newsletter yet, go to ownerops.com/newsletter. That's OWNROPS.com/newsletter. We summarize all of the learning lessons from the interviews with the guests on the podcast, and we distill those into short, actionable tips, tricks, tactics, and strategies that you can use to grow your own local service business. Sign up for the newsletter at ownerops.com. That's OWNROPS.com.
The final point I would say on this cost leakage is thinking about what we call direct costs and indirect costs, right? So the indirect costs, we could also call that corporate overhead costs, right? That's the cost of running my website. That's the cost of my phone service. And we often don't think about that in terms of bidding out the job. And so we now have a much better sense of what our corporate overhead costs are as a percentage of revenue. Right now, it's too high, so I can't feel all that through, honestly. And as we grow and scale and grow into the infrastructure that we've built, it'll become more in line. But there's somewhere to the tune of 20% of your revenue is in this corporate overhead cost, maybe as much as 30% of your revenue is in this corporate overhead cost. That's your director of operations, whose indirect costs, all these telephone marketing costs. It's really layering that into each of your job too, so that each job is paying for some of those overhead costs. So that's where you run the risk of, I did a job for a week for $5,000. I factored in my cost, my skid steer, my labor, my fuel. I made some money. Well, did you really? Did you pay for your fringe cost that week? Did you pay for your corporate overhead that week? Did you pay for all these? So that's something I'd really encourage people to look at.
It's such a good word. And I was fortunate to have a friend of one of my father's who runs, I think he owns 3 different businesses in the trades, and they're all either right around or above 10 million. And, you know, his main thing was, when I was starting out, he said, you have to allocate overhead cost to every single job that you do. And he said, if you ever want to get to the point where you have an office operations manager, if you ever want to get to the point where you have a website that's generating you leads, you're going to have to pay for insurance one way or the other. But his point was, in the beginning, you need to allocate a certain percentage to that overhead. And then the last thing that he mentioned was profit. He said, you're in business to generate a profit. And you know, it's funny because I think there's I kind of see a trend in millennials where it's like, oh, it's not all about the money. It's not all about the money. And well, it's not all about the money. Like, we are in business, and that is the game. And if you're generating a profit, you are winning the game. And none of us are in business because we're not competitive. It's like, the goal is to win the game, right? And so you have to generate a profit on each job. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, I'll just go work for somebody else and have them pay my paycheck and leave at 5 p.m. Yeah. You know, it's like, so how do you approach profit on each job?
Right. So there's a saying that I had learned a long time ago when I was working in investment banking with Goldman Sachs, and they said, the importance of being long-term greedy. And by being long-term greedy, it meant to focus on what the customer needs and to focus on doing the right thing for the customer. I don't really like that word greedy because I don't like to think of us being that way at all. That's not a motivator at all. I think it can be very misleading. But the meaning behind that saying was to focus on what the customer needs, focus on giving the right advice, doing the right thing. And in the long run, it will all work out where you do make a profit. And in business with heavy equipment, absolutely, it's about the profit and the money, because you will be out of business in a very short period of time if you're not. And so people who are doing site work, heavy equipment work, by definition are not greedy, because it's not great margin work. It's hard work. It's capital intensive, equipment that you're putting to work. It's dangerous work, right? So, and there's nothing about this that is a quick, get rich quick scheme at all. It takes decades to build a business and franchise and profit and do all that. And so the way we think about it is we do a lot of project costing after the project is over, and we look at profit by project, and then we do a debrief on what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what lessons do we want to carry forward, which ones do we not want to make a mistake. If you don't have the discipline of tracking cost by project and doing that by project, you're really going to regret that, because you're going to be a year, 2, 3 years down the road, and you're going to realize, wow, I've left a lot of money on the table. So, over the last couple of years, we've completely rehauled our pricing model, completely rehauled our cost accounting model. And after each job, we look at, okay, what did we do right? Did we get the bid wrong? Did we get the execution wrong? And really have those honest conversations with yourselves in terms of how you like to change. We have changed as a result. It's like, you know what? You're just always, on a large job, you're just always going to need 2 guys, not 1. You're just going to need 2 guys to run around and get things done. right? And so putting in one, it's just not practical. And so, little lessons learned like that you can then not repeat over and over, going forward. But that project by project cost analysis is really, really critical to making the next one better. But that's how we think about it. So, hey, if we've made a mistake in terms of the job and we're going to have to take a loss to fix it, then so be it. If we have to get called back to fix something on a job, we do it, at no expense. And so by doing that, we've built a reputation as a premium service provider. And that's where on this final topic here, is how do we think about, profitability and the customers is, my view in all the businesses that my wife and I own, in every single business, it is a premium product, premium service. And I truly believe that if you have that, you'll have long-term success, you'll have customer loyalty. And so when you think about how you want to compete in the marketplace, really think about how you want to compete. Do you want to be the low-cost provider? Do you want to be a niche provider and have a very narrow offering, but at a premium price because it's really good? So like some things like welding, for example, is a real art and a real craft. It's hard to find great welders. You can build all kinds of wonderful structures, if you're a welder. And you just do that and nothing else. I have some guys I know locally who they weld and they truck, right? They do both. So just finding your niche and how you want to differentiate. We don't differentiate on price. We differentiate on service. And that means, more cost to provide that premium service. That means, more expensive maintenance and more expensive upkeep. So just figure out what your business model is going to be and what your customers value. Find your segment. And then get your pricing and your cost aligned to what that segment's going to pay you.
That's a fantastic word for all of our listeners. I do appreciate you sharing that. And I love the fact that you and I are aligned on, I think that the philosophy, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but like the reason for being a premium product is because that is challenging us to be the absolute best that we can be as a team. And
yeah, I don't know what, yeah, exactly. It's like, it's got to be in your DNA that you want to be the best. Right. And it starts with that. And then from there, you can follow that strategy.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen, I appreciate you taking the time to be on this morning. You shared some great knowledge, especially with your financial background here on how to approach coming into an industry that does require a lot of equipment, does require a lot of hard work, does require a lot of grit. And so to your point that you just made, I believe that there's opportunity in these types of trade businesses right now. And I think that our listeners will get a lot of value out of listening to how you've approached it just with a sound financial mind. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate the invitation.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners? Like what advice would you give people starting out in the excavation business or any business really?
Well, I'd say number one is it has to be a family commitment to it, right? I've been blessed to be married to my wife for 28 years, and she's incredibly supportive of entrepreneurial activities. She also is involved in one of our other businesses, and it takes a lot of work and long days, and you have some successes and you have some failures, but continuing to move onward and upward every single day. I've been blessed with a great business partner in the investment banking side. I've known him since 1996, the same year that I got married, actually. And so I think having great business partners and great spouses is really, really key. And for the family to understand what you're trying to do and to appreciate that and support you is really important. I think so many times where I meet people where they don't have that kind of support and ecosystem around them, it makes it very difficult. It creates a very difficult, home life for them and a work-life balance. So that's number one. Number two, it's just a personal opinion, but faith over fear. I mean, really having a faith to lean on. There will be days that you are very frightened about what might happen, financially or for a project or whatever it might be. And I think trying to not be anxious about tomorrow, but to be present and to be focused on today and to be faithful about where your strategy should lead you and being given kind of that guidance. I think it's really, really helpful to have that. So that's something just personally that's helped me through difficult times, and there are difficult times for every entrepreneur. I sell a lot of companies, and I always marvel that when some of these entrepreneurs are up on stage or on a panel talking about their experience, they don't want to share the hardships. They don't want to share the failures. There's something about our culture that sort of shames that and makes that embarrassing. I'm happy to do a whole podcast on all my failures, right? So that people can learn from them. But I think it's from our failures that make us smarter, make us wiser, make us, more equipped to handle the next situation. And so we just have to embrace those and be honest about those, right? And I think sometimes if we would share more with our fellow entrepreneurs about what works and doesn't work, it helps everybody. That's kind of my attitude, to share that. I've made a number of mistakes, and I can talk about why I made them, how they came about, how I corrected them. And so that's another thing, that's just to be very honest with yourself. I think humility is the other thing that's helped. As I share with our crew, there's nobody on the crew, there's nobody on the team who knows all the answers, starting with me. I don't try to act like I know all the answers. I love brainstorming. I just had a lunch with our customer yesterday, and he's a customer, but also does similar type of work. He was just sharing so many great ideas, and nobody's too old to be mentored, and nobody's too old to learn. And so I think that kind of attitude is something that I try to carry every day, is just continuous improvement, continuously learning, and not getting stuck in your ways. Small businesses can become very, mom and pop, as we call them, and stuck in your ways. And so like you in your business, using online marketing and current kind of business practices, you're really able to grow. And that's what I encourage people to do, is learn online marketing, learn technology, use quoting tools, use these different types of things that are available to us. By simply adding ELD devices to our truck, we took our insurance down by $12,000 in 1 year. So most people think you can't do anything about your insurance bill.
Wow.
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can. But by having the confidence in our drivers to have their data tracked, and we track it and we show them their results every month, but by doing that, we get really good driving scores. And by getting really good driving scores, we reduce our insurance significantly. We plug it right into our insurance company, and they can see what our drivers are doing. If everybody's working together as a team and working as a goal, you can really make a difference. And so those are all the little pieces of advice I would give. I don't want to create a long answer there to your question, but there's a lot of things I think are really important. And so I would just encourage folks to think about some of those things if they haven't.
Such an incredible word. Thank you so much for sharing, Stephen. And we will have to have you back on to talk about some failures if you're open to it, because I do believe there would be some valuable learning lessons there.
Yeah,
well, thanks
too.
Cool. Well, thanks again for being on, Stephen. And listeners, thanks again for listening to another episode of the OWNR OPS Podcast, where we talk all about strategies, tips, and tactics for building locally owned service-based businesses. If you have not already, and if you're enjoying this content, we would sure appreciate a 5-star review. So take 30 seconds right now, if you're on Spotify or Apple, and leave a 5-star review. Just like building a local service business, Stephen mentioned some of the online marketing tactics. Google reviews are so important in this day and age. So I encourage you to go ask your customers for reviews, but podcasts are very similar. So that's why I'm asking you guys for reviews here. And then finally, if you're listening on YouTube, we'd sure appreciate a like and subscribe. You'll get a notification each week whenever we drop this episode. And then we just added in a weekly newsletter where we're summarizing the podcast episode. So everything that Stephen talked about here, we're going to summarize the learning lessons, deliver those to you in an easy to read newsletter on Saturday morning. So check that out on our website. That's ownerops.com/newsletter, OWNROPS.com/newsletter. And we will wrap this episode up. Don't forget, work hard, do your best, never settle for less. We'll see you guys next week.